How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're starting Daf Kuf Gimel, Daf 103 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, today should be a shorter daf than yesterday. Sheesh, that was a big one yesterday. Today's daf is Givaldig. I broke it down into two sections. The first one being alternative mincha donation commitments. Wow, that sounds like a horrible title. But basically, the idea is if a mincha is a specific thing, right? A minchas nedava, a donated mincha, is by default 1 isaron. It is always wheat. It is brought with oil and frankincense, and it is soulless. It is fine flour. If you mess with any of those variables, what happens? What if you say, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley or a mincha without oil? Or so what happens in that scenario? And secondly, maximum flour amounts for a mincha. What happens if you donate 100 isarons of flour as a mincha? How practically speaking, how does that work? How many vessels? Big adol, I'd say those are the main sugyas of today's daf. I think it should be pretty interesting stuff. So friends, join me. Let's have a great time studying Daf Kuf Gimel, Daf 103 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, we begin on Daf Kuf Gimel Amid Aleph at the Mishnah, about 6 lines or so in to the Amid. Zogt the Mishnah. Ha'omer arei alai mincha min asorim. Yavi Menachitim. So if somebody says, I'm going to bring a korban mincha of barley, right? As I mentioned in the introduction a minute ago, a minchas nedava is by default 1 isaron. It is also wheat. It's soulless, which is fine flour, as opposed to kind of regular flour. It is brought with oil. It is brought with frankincense. Hopefully I got all the things. So if you mess with, what happens if you mess with any of those variables? So Omer, Hari Ola mincha min asorim. If a person says, I'm going to bring a korban mincha of barley, Yavi Menachitim. So, interestingly, what happens in that case is he does not bring a korban mincha of barley. So there's two kind of, I guess main alternatives would be maybe he brings nothing at all, because he basically committed to bring something that doesn't exist, a barley donated offering. Barley is only the minchas omer, which is a minchas tzibor, or the minchas sota. But he's not a sota, so he committed to bringing a mincha that is not a bringable mincha. So one alternative is maybe he shouldn't have to bring anything at all. The other alternative is he's committing to bring a mincha, so he should bring a mincha of wheat, not a mincha of barley. So the Mishnah sides with that option, and that is Yavi Menachitim. He brings just a regular korban mincha from wheat, not of barley, since barley is not actually an option. Kemach Yavi Solis, if he says, I'm going to bring a mincha of regular flour, but it needs to be fine flour, so he brings a mincha of fine flour. Below shemen of below levona, I'm going to bring a mincha without oil, without frankincense. Yavi shemen ulevona, he brings a mincha, but with oil and with frankincense. You get the pattern here? The pattern is, if he messes with the variables, we just tell him to bring a regular, we say, thank you for committing to bringing a regular korban mincha. Chatzi isaron yavi isaron shalom. If he commits to bringing half an isaron, there's no such thing as half an isaron, so he's got to bring a full isaron. Isaron v'mertzel yavi shnaim. If he says 1.5 isarons, he brings 2 isarons. Reb Shimon Poter, whereas Reb Shimon says in all these cases, he doesn't have to bring a korban mincha at all, shelo isnadim kederech ha'misnadim, because he did not commit in the way that people generally commit. People would commit to multiples of 1 isaron, 2 isarons, 3 isarons, whatever, and soulless, with frankincense, with oil, and of wheat. So, says Reb Shimon, since he messed around with the variables, he doesn't bring anything at all. The Tanna Kama says he does bring just a regular mincha. Now, frag the Gemara amai. Why do we say that he has to bring a regular korban mincha? Neder pischo imo hu. It is a neder, and also it's open. It's undoing. It's opening. Meaning, look, the person says, I want to bring a mincha of barley. Why would we compel him? It's almost like we're like answering for him. Oh, you want to bring a mincha of barley? Oh, probably what you really want to bring is a mincha of wheat. Bring a mincha of wheat. And now he's here to bring a mincha of wheat. Why are we answering for him? Maybe what he's saying is, maybe he initially said, I want to bring a mincha, but then he changed his mind maybe. And therefore he said, you know what, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley because he knows that barley isn't actually a mincha. It's his way of saying, actually, I changed my mind. I don't actually want to bring a korban mincha. So basically he's saying, I'm going to bring a mincha. Actually, forget it. I don't actually want to bring a korban mincha. So if he's saying that he doesn't want to bring a korban mincha, why are we saying, oh yeah, bring a regular korban mincha? Like why are we compelling him to bring a regular mincha when that isn't what he committed to? And sure, what he committed to is something that isn't a possibility. So say, don't bring anything at all. Why are we assuming that he wants to bring, that his intention is to bring a regular mincha, and we say, go bring a regular mincha. So again, why are we compelling him to bring a regular mincha? Neder ufischo imo. It's a neder, but also it's undoing. He's saying, I want to bring a korban mincha. Okay, that's a regular mincha schitim, a wheat mincha. But then he says, wait, of barley, it's essentially saying, actually, I don't want to bring a korban mincha. So Omer Chizkiah, so we're going to see two answers. One of Chizkiah and the other of Rabbi Yochanan. So Chizkiah's answer is, Hamani Beis Shammai. Chizkiah says that, well, the Tanakama in our Mishnah is actually Beis Shammai. The Ami Tfos Lashon Rishon. That Beis Shammai's opinion is that in a scenario like this, where essentially he says two things. One is, I want to bring a mincha. The other essentially is, actually, I don't want to bring a mincha. So we go based on what he says first, right? So when he says, Omer Arei Olai Mincha Min HaSorim, he's basically saying two things. He's saying Arei Olai Mincha, but he's also saying Min HaSorim. First he's saying, I'm going to bring a mincha. Then he's saying, I'm effectively not bringing a mincha. So we go based on what he says first. What's the proof for that? Ditnan, as we learn in the Mishnah, in Masechta Nazir, Hareini Nazir Min HaGrogris Min HaDvela. If he says, I'm going to be a Nazir, okay, great. It means that he can't cut his hair, or drink wine, etc. But then he throws a curveball and he says, from figs and fig cakes, whatever. Fig products, essentially. That's not a thing. A Nazir is wine products, is grape products, not fig products. So Beis Shammai Nazir. Beis Shammai says, well, the first thing he said was that he's going to be a Nazir. The second thing he said was something about fig products, which is irrelevant to being a Nazir. But the first thing he said was, Hareini Nazir. We stick with that. That's enough for us. And says Beis Shammai is a Nazir. And therefore, right, Tfos Lashon Rishon. We say the same thing over here. He says, Harei Olai Mincha Min HaSorim. We say, wait, well, the first thing he said was Harei Olai Mincha. We stick with that, and that's why he brings a regular mincha. Beis Hillel Omrim Eino Nazir. When it comes to the Nazir and the figs, Beis Hillel takes a look at the whole statement, and he says, wait a second, he's talking about being a Nazir of figs. That is not a thing, and he will not be a Nazir. And we would say the same thing here as well, that when he says, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley, we look at the whole statement and we say, wait a second, no, that doesn't seem right. But from the fact that we're saying that he brings a regular korban mincha, so Chizkiah says that the Tanakama of our Mishnah reflects the opinion of Beis Shammai, that we go based on the first thing he said, which is, I'm going to bring a korban mincha, therefore he brings a korban mincha of wheat. Rabbi Yochanan, so that was Chizkiah's opinion. Chizkiah's opinion was that the Reisha is that the Tanakama's opinion of Beis Shammai, that we go based on the first thing he says, and that's why he brings a regular mincha. But Beis Hillel, but that was Beis Shammai, but Beis Hillel would not agree with that because they would look at the whole statement, which also talks about barley. Rabbi Yochanan Amar afilu tema Beis Hillel. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan says, wait, you can even say that the Tanakama is Beis Hillel as well. It's like Beis Hillel as well, that we take the whole statement into account. Now here's the thing. So he's saying, I'm going to bring a korban mincha, but he kind of says something that makes us think that maybe he's making a mistake. Because he says he's going to bring a mincha of barley. Now, you see, barley, we do have a concept of barley minchas, minchas ha'omer, minchas sota, but somebody who brings a voluntary meal offering is not going to be bringing a barley offering. That's going to be wheat. So it sounds like he made a mistake, and we just need some clarification here, right? So Beis Hillel Beis Hillel, who says that basically we look at the whole statement, in this case, he's saying, wait, we might need to clarify some things here. Be'omer ilu ayisi odea, that we ask him, hey, you know that you just committed to bring a barley offering. You realize that barley, you can't actually bring a barley offering. It's got to be a wheat offering. And he says, ilu ayisi odea, okay, I didn't know that. If I did know that I would have had to have committed to bringing a wheat offering. She'ein nodrin kach, that if I would have known that we don't commit to barley offerings, lo ayisi no dekach, I would not have committed to a barley offering, elakach, rather I would have committed to a wheat offering. So Rabbi Yochanan says that you can even say that the ratio of the Mishnah is like Beis Hillel, says that we take into account the whole statement. And what the whole statement was that he says he's going to bring a mincha offering of barley, and we say, wait a second, let's get a clarification what exactly he meant then. Did you know that you can't commit to a barley offering, you have to commit to a wheat offering? He says, I didn't know that. Okay, if I would have known that, I would have committed to a wheat offering, and that is why we say, okay, bring a wheat offering. It's once we've clarified that was in fact his intention. Now, we are going to see essentially Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan are now both, first Chizkiah and then Rabbi Yochanan are going to make statements that would seem a little bit surprising based on what we just learned about them, that Chizkiah says that the ratio of the Mishnah is Beis Shammai. Rabbi Yochanan said that it can even be Beis Hillel. Both Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan are now going to make statements that would seem surprising, starting with Chizkiah. Amar Chizkiah says, Chizkiah, Lo shanu ela de amar mincha min asarim, that when we say in the Mishnah, that when he says, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley, we say, okay, great, bring a mincha of wheat. That's only because he specifically said he's going to bring a mincha of barley. Aval amar mincha mina adashim. But if, for example, he said he's going to bring a mincha of lentils, well then, lo. Then we would not say bring a mincha of wheat. So Chizkiah says, right, he clarifies his position in a strange way, in a peculiar way, that we will explain the peculiarity in just a second. But Chizkiah essentially clarifies that when we say Tvos Lashon Rishon, essentially, and we say, well, he committed to bring a mincha, so he's got to bring a mincha of wheat, even though he said barley, we go based on the fact he says he's going to bring a mincha, we go based on the first thing he said. But now Chizkiah says that that's only holds true if he says, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley, but if he says, I'm going to bring a mincha of lentils, then we would not say to bring a mincha of wheat. Michdei, but I don't understand. Chizkiah come an omer l'shmai tiki Beis Hillel. I'm sorry, ki Beis Shammai. Excuse me, I need some more tea. This is surprising because Chizkiah had said that the ratio of the Mishnah is Beis Shammai, Beis Shammai mishum tvos lashon rishonu. Now Beis Shammai, his opinion is based on, the opinion of Beis Shammai is based on Tvos Lashon Rishon. You go based on the first thing that they said. You could break their statement into two parts. Hare olai mincha minas orim. So there's hare olai mincha and minas orim. We say, well, we go based on the first part of the statement, mina mincha. In that case, who cares what the second part of the statement is? I don't care if he says hare olai mincha min Hasorim or Mina Adashim, who cares? We're going based on the first part of the statement. Why would Chizkiah clarify that this only holds true if he says Are Olai Mincha Mina Saorim, but not if he says Mina Adashim? Who cares? We're just going based on Are Olai Mincha either way. Beis Shammai's whole shita is based on, we just go based on the first part of the statement. So we don't care about the second part of the statement. Who cares if the second part of the statement is of barley or of lentils? Either way, we're just going based on the first part of the statement of, I'm going to bring a korban mincha. And therefore you bring a mincha of wheat. So harder bay. So says the Gemara that Chizkiah changed his mind to agree with Rabbi Yochanan that the ratio is actually the opinion of Beis Hillel, and that it's talking about where he made a mistake, and we clarify the mistake. where he said, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley, and we say, 1 second, I think you might be making a mistake there. This isn't a mincha sa'omer or a mincha sota. I think maybe you meant wheat. And he says, yes, wheat. But clarifications are for when something's off. Not for some, it's kind of like something's like missing the mark, but not where it's like totally like not even in the direction of the mark. So meaning barley is missing the mark. It's supposed to be wheat. He said barley. There are other menachos that are barley, but not this one. Lentils, on the other hand, is just in the completely wrong direction. There is no, lentils are not offered as menachos. So therefore, why did Chizkiah change his mind? Because Rava says because Chizkiah had another look, a more critical look at the Mishnah, and he says something is fishy here. Why did the Mishnah, out of all of the types of flowers it could have chosen, did the Mishnah specifically choose barley, a flour that actually is used in the context of the minchas omer and the context of the minchas sota? Why specifically use that flour? Why not choose any other kind of flour like lentils? It's peculiar. It triggered something. It tickled Chizkiah's imagination, and he realized, wait a second, this isn't a random product. This is specifically something that is used in other menachos. Lesni min adoshim. Why not say if he commits to bringing a mincha of lentil flour? Elashma mina. Rather, the Mishnah deliberately chose as an alternative product barley, mishum detoihu, because barley would be considered a mistake rather than completely missing the mark. And a mistake is something that we would want to clarify. And the clarification was the opinion of Beis Hillel, who says that we look at the whole statement and we say, wait a second, you said barley, maybe you meant wheat. B'se'orim toi, ba'adoshim lo toi. People would make a mistake by a mincha with barley, since there are other menachos that are brought from barley. People would not make kind of an innocent mistake when it comes to lentils. And therefore, the Mishnah went out of its way to say barley because it was pointing out that we're talking about a situation of a mistake, and that is aligned with the approach of Beis Hillel, who says that we're going to clarify, did you really mean barley or maybe you meant wheat? But if he said lentils, we're not going to say, oh, maybe you meant wheat. No. He meant something completely different. Okay. So therefore, Chizkiah actually changed his mind to hold like Rabbi Yochanan. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says something surprising. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, afilu mina adoshim. You see, now Rabbi Yochanan says even lentil flour, which is surprising because Rabbi Yochanan was the one who had said that the ratio is Beis Hillel, and Beis Hillel was the one who talks about making a mistake and clarifying a mistake. All of a sudden comes Rabbi Yochanan, he's talking about lentils. There's no if he said lentils, he clearly was not talking about a mincha. There's no mistake to clarify. Who did Rabbi Yochanan say that the ratio is going like a Beis Hillel? Beis Hillel mishum detoyu. Beis Hillel is all about clarifying a mistake. Bisorin toi. People make mistakes about barley for menachos. Ba'adoshim lo toi. Saying they're going to bring a mincha of lentils is not a mistake. It's deliberately saying that you don't actually intend to bring a korban mincha. The Dvar of the Chizkiah Ka'amar answers the Gemara that Rabbi Yochanan is actually just responding to Chizkiah, because Chizkiah had initially said, of course, that the ratio is based Shammai of Tfos Lashon Rishon. Chizkiah then reconsidered his position because he looked at the Se'orim and he says, wait, I think that that's more like Beis Hillel, the whole mistake thing. Rabbi Yochanan is saying to Chizkiah, wait, truth is, I can answer for you that Chizkiah, you said that the ratio was Beis Shammai. Even though it says barley, I can explain to you why it could say barley according to Beis Shammai. Why did you change your mind, Chizkiah? Mishum de lo katani mina adoshim. Because the Mishnah does not say lentil flour, it says barley flour. But Dilma lo mi baya ka'amar. But Chizkiah, you can argue that the Mishnah really is the opinion of Beis Shammai, that Tfos Lashon Rishon, that even if he says something completely different, like lentil flour, or like a Nazir saying that he's going to be a Nazir of figs, which is completely irrelevant, we'd say go based on the first thing. So it says Rabbi Yochanan to Chizkiah, I can tell you how you can explain why the Mishnah says barley, even though it could have said lentils, and that's lo mibaya kamer, lo mibaya mina adashim. Certainly, if he would have said, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley, tika lememer mahader hu dehader be, that he's going back, he's trying to take back his commitment to bringing a mincha, right? He says, I'm going to bring a mincha, and then he's saying, wait a second, no, I don't actually want to bring a mincha. So he's saying from lentil flour, because lentils are completely irrelevant, i.e. he's saying, I'm going to bring a mincha, actually, wait, I actually changed my mind, I don't want to bring a mincha, and still, Beis Shammai says, Tvos Lashon Rishon, Utvos Lashon Rishon, Ela afilu min asorim, but even, and maybe the chiddush is that according to Beis Shammai, even if he says, I'm going to bring a mincha, and then he says barley, which is not as obvious that he's changing his mind. If you change his mind to lentils, which is completely irrelevant, there's no lentil mincha, so okay, I understand. He says, I'm going to bring a mincha, then he's changing his mind. But if he says seorin, I might think he's not changing his mind, maybe he's just making a mistake. Afilu min asorim, but nonetheless, what the Mishnah could be saying is it's like Beis Shammai, and even if he says, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley, nami de'ika lemeimar, mitau dekatoi, that you could argue maybe he's making a mistake, and therefore, maybe he doesn't actually intend to bring a minchas chitin. Kilu, if he's saying that I'm going to bring a mincha, so he's committing to bring a mincha, then he says, wait, I changed my mind, and therefore he says lentils, which is completely irrelevant. Beis Shammai's opinion is, look, you can't take it back, right? Tosfos points out, I think maybe Rashi points out as well, that Beis Shammai holds like Reb Meir holds, which is Ein adam motzi dvar v'vatala. A person doesn't say things for no reason, and he also holds that you can't take back. Whereas the Amri Ein she'ela b'hektish, you can't basically he says you can't take back essentially the neder that he made, and therefore if he says I'm going to bring a mincha, and then he tries to take it back and say lentils because he wants to take back the mincha, he says you can't do that. We go based on the first thing you said. You said you're going to bring a mincha, we stick with that. But if he was making a mistake, if he thought that he could bring a mincha of barley, he didn't realize that no, it's only wheat. Maybe he doesn't want to bring it of wheat. So in that case, maybe Beis Shammai would say that, okay, don't bring a korban mincha. And says Rabbi Yochanan, you could say that the chiddush is that even so, afilu achi tvos lashon rishon, and even so we would say, bring the mincha. So Rabbi Yochanan says to Chizkiah, you could still stick with your opinion and say that the Reisha is Beis Shammai. And why does it say barley and not lentils? Because it's teaching a chiddush. That sure, if it said lentils, yeah, that would be the kind of easier case for Beis Shammai, right? That he's saying I'm going to bring a mincha, then he's changing his mind and saying lentils, something that is completely not a mincha, to say actually I don't want to bring a mincha. And we're saying no, you can't do that. Tvos lashon rishon. You got to bring a mincha. But I might have thought that, but if he says I'm going to bring a mincha of barley, maybe he was simply making an honest mistake. And we'd say, okay, fine, you don't need to bring the korban mincha. And essentially he's saying, if I thought I could bring a mincha of barley. I didn't realize that it has to be wheat. And maybe we would say he doesn't have to bring the mincha. And the chiddush is that even so, Beis Shammai would still say, Tvos lashon rishon, no, you have to bring a regular mincha, you committed to bring a mincha. So Rabbi Yochanan is actually answering for Chizkiah that you can still say that the Reisha is Beis Shammai, and answer for why it says barley and not lentils. Gewaldig. Okay, so what have we seen so far? So we saw that the Mishnah and the Reisha had said that if a person says, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley, or without oil or frankincense or whatever, so we say you got to bring a regular korban mincha. And we saw the opinion of Chizkiah, who had said that the Reisha is like Beis Shammai, who says Tvos lashon rishon, that you got to bring korban mincha because the first thing you said is I'm going to bring a mincha. We go based on that. And Beis Hillel says, Rabbi Yochanan says that it could even be Beis Hillel, and that it said he made a mistake by saying seorim, and we clarify, and he says, if I knew it was wheat, I would have brought wheat, and that's why he brings wheat. Chizkiah got kind of a little bit thrown off by why it said Sa'orim, so he actually changed his mind to hold like Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan then said, Chizkiah, you could still hold that it's Beis Shammai and we can explain why it says Sa'orim. Now, I'm going to take a little tea and we'll go weiter. Omar Ze'iri says, Ze'iri lo shanu ela de Omar mincha. Okay, so Ze'iri is talking about Tvos Lashon Rishon. That if we're going to explain the Reisha of the Mishnah to be Tvos Lashon Rishon, that when he says, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley, he's saying two things. I'm going to bring a mincha, barley. We go based on the first thing, I'm going to bring a mincha. So he's got to bring a regular mincha of wheat. So it says, Ze'iri lo shanu ela de Omar mincha. He has to say, I am bringing, right? Hare olai mincha min ha'sa'orim. I'm bringing a mincha. It's not enough to say Hare olai min ha'sa'orim. That's not enough. Or se'orim. He has to say mincha. That's the key word. That's an important word. He has to say the magic word mincha. If he doesn't say mincha, if he just says Hare olai se'orim, low, then we wouldn't, right? Because again, based on the concept of ein adam motzi dvar levatala, that a person isn't going to just say things for no reason. So maybe we would say, when he says Hare olai se'orim, maybe essentially he's saying mincha min ha'sa'orim, tvos lashon rishon, and he has to bring a regular mincha of chitim. So says the Iri, no, when we say Tvos Lashon Rishon, he has to say specifically, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley. In that case, we say, okay, you got to bring a mincha of wheat. Yosef Rav Nachman v'ka'amar la shmaita. Rav Nachman was sitting and giving over this shtickle Torah. Eis ve'Rava le Rav Nachman. Rava asks a question of Rav Nachman. Kemach Yavi Solos. The Mishnah says, our Mishnah says, Kemach, if he says I'm going to bring Kemach, regular flour, Yavi Solos, he's got to bring fine flour. My lab, Delo Amr Mincha. Is that not talking about where he did not say Mincha? He just said Kemach, and we say, okay, you have to bring Solos. So even though all he said was Kemach, we say you have to bring a regular Mincha from Solos. Lo do Amar Mincha. No, he said Mincha of Kemach. Okay, when he says below Shemen Ulevona, Yavi Shemen Ulevona. He says without Shemen Ulevona, we say you still have to bring with oil and frankincense. My lab, Delo Amar Mincha. Is that not talking about we did not say mincha and still we say you have to bring a regular mincha? Lo do Amar Mincha. No, he said mincha. Okay. Chatzi Yisarun. Yavi Yisarun Shalom. The Mishnah had said if he says I'm going to bring half an Yisarun, there's no such thing as half an Yisarun. So we say you have to bring a regular Yisarun. My lab, Delo Amar Mincha. Is that not talking about we didn't say the word mincha? Lo do Amar Mincha. He said the word mincha. So far, aligned with Zeiri that he has to say the word mincha, and then we'll say Tvos Lashon Rishon. But then what about the next part of the Mishnah? Isaron v'mechza. And he says, I'm going to bring 1.5 isarons. Yavi shnayim. So the Mishnah said if he says I'm going to bring 1.5 isarons, he brings 2. But came into Omar mincha. But once he says mincha, though, if we're talking about, so he basically says, I'm going to bring a mincha, and he says isaron and a half. Essentially what he's saying is, right, so he's saying mincha isarun v'mechza. So essentially we're going to divide that in 2. That he's saying, I'm going to bring a mincha of an isarun. Okay. And that's essentially what he's committing to. Ichayv le b'isarun. It's chayv to bring an isarun. Ki omar chatzi isarun. When then he says a half an isarun, well, that's nothing. Lo klum kamer. That's irrelevant. You should only have to bring 1 isarun, right? If he says, are olay mincha isarun v'chetzi, right? Isarun v'mechza. So essentially saying minchas isarun is a regular mincha of 1 isarun, and then when he says v'mechza, that's a separate thing, but a half a isarun is irrelevant. But the arei olai mincha, the tvos lashon rishon is on the isarun, right? Arei olai minchas isarun. So it's 1 isarun. Then we ignore the v'mechza part. You only have to bring 1 isarun, not 2 isaruns. So lo klum ka amar. So lo tzricha de amar. So it's talking about a scenario where he says arei olai mincha chatzi isarun. No, it's talking about where he says I'm going to bring a mincha. So when he says arei olai mincha, we say tvos lashon rishon, and we say okay, so he's got to bring a mincha, a regular mincha, and isaron. Then when he says chatzi isaron ve'isaron, so the Omar mincha, when initially he says I'm going to bring a mincha, so he chayiv lebi isaron, so he's got to bring a mincha of an isaron, right? Tfos lashon rishon. We go by somebody says I'm going to bring a mincha, he brings an isaron. Ki Omar chatzi isaron v'lo klum ka Omar. When he then says a half an isaron, what's half an isaron? It's irrelevant. Ki hadar Omar, but then when he says isaron, then he says I'm going to bring an isaron. Mais isaron achmina, so he's committing to bring a second isaron, and that's why he brings two isarons, right? So the scenario we said in our Mishnah, the scenario where he commits to an isaron and a half, he brings two isarons. So we said that that's based on Tfos Lashon Rishon. We say that that's talking about a situation where he says I'm going to bring a mincha, and then he says a half of isaron. So when he says I'm going to bring a mincha, so he's committing to one isaron. When he says a half isaron, what's that? It's irrelevant. But then he says again in isaron. So he says a mincha, half isaron, isaron. The half isaron is irrelevant. The mincha is a commitment to bring one isaron. Then when he says I'm going to bring an isaron, he says half isaron, which is irrelevant. Then he says isaron. That's the second isaron. That's why he's bringing two isarons. Okay, fine. But fragli Gemara, Yochi, if that's the case, that we're saying that he had said I'm going to bring a mincha. I'm going to bring a mincha. We're saying Tfos Lashon Rishon. Well, if we assume that Reb Shimon also agrees with if we assume that when we see Reb Shimon at the very end of the Mishnah, he isn't disagreeing with Tfos Lashon Rishon. If we assume that Reb Shimon also holds Tfos Lashon Rishon, Iachi, Reb Shimon Poter, Shlos Nadav Kederech HaMesnadvim, when Reb Shimon says in all of these cases, he doesn't have to bring a Korban Mincha, because he did it in an unusual way, right? He said barley, he said without oil, frankincense, regular flour. But amai, what's irregular? Once he says mincha, if we assume Tfos Lashon Rishon, he committed to bringing a mincha. Anything else he said is irrelevant. So Amar Rava says, Reb Shimon, Beshitas Reb Yossi, Amar, well, Reb Shimon doesn't agree with the Tanakama about Tfos Lashon Rishon, assuming that we explained the Tanakama as being Tfos Lashon Rishon, like Chizkiah initially said. So the Amar Ab Bigmar Dvar of Adam Matpis. That Rabbi Yossi says we also take into consideration Gemar Dvar, the whole statement, not just the beginning but also the end. And because we consider the whole statement, yes, Rabbi Shimon would say that this is an unusual neder, and that's why he says he does not need to bring a neder according to Reb Shimon. So according to the Tanakama, he needs to bring a regular korban mincha. According to Reb Shimon, he says it doesn't bring a korban mincha because we look at the whole statement, and it was an unusual commitment to bring a mincha, and therefore he does not need to bring a mincha. Friends, now we get up to the next Mishnah. Maximum flour amounts for a mincha. What does that mean? Misnadiv adam mincha shel shishim isarim. Says the Mishnah that a person can commit to bringing a mincha of 60 isarons, and all of those 60 isarons can go into one bowl. If he says I'm going to bring 61 isarons, I think we've seen this before. Maybe shishim b'chli echad be'echad b'chli echad. Well, in that case, he has gone over the one vessel limit, the maximum for one vessel. If he says I'm going to bring 61 isarons, so he puts 60 in one vessel, and the remainder, in this case, one isaron, will go in another vessel. And the reason being, according to the Tanakama, who we'll see in the Gemara, is Rabbi Yehuda, Shekain Hatzibor Mevi B'Yom Arishan Shel Chag Shechal Yos B'Shabbos, because 61 isarons, meaning the max in one vessel is 60, because 61 isarons is the maximum that the community, that the public ever brings on any given day. And that maximum is on the first day of Sukkot that falls out on Shabbos. If the first day of Sukkot falls out on Shabbos, there are 61 isarons of flour that are brought that day. How come? Because on the first day of Sukkot, there are 13 cows. Each cow, of course, has 3 isarons. So that's 13 times 3. You're already up to 39 isarons. There are 14 sheep. Each sheep is 1 isaron. 39 and 14 is 53. 2 rams. Each ram is 2 isarons. So that's 2 times 2 is 4. 53 and 4 is 57. There's also Talmud Shel Shachar, Talmud Shel Ben Arbaim. 2 sheep, 1 isaron each. We're up to 59. And then because it's Shabbos, Uviyom HaShabbos Shnei Kvasim B'nei Shana Tamimim. 2 sheep as the Korban Musaf for Shabbos, each sheep as an isaron. 59 goes up to 61. So the maximum that the community will ever be bringing of isarons, of flour for communal korbanos on any given day is 61. And because that's the max, shishim ve'echad dayo liyochid shehu pachos min hatzibur echad. And therefore, if the community's max is 61, so an individual's max will be just one lower, 60. The maximum you could bring in one vessel is 60 isarons of flour. Reb Shimon says, Reb Shimon, I don't know about that. To compare the 60 isarons of an individual that are all going to be mixed together in one bowl, to compare that to a disparate bunch of korbanis that includes cows, rams, sheep, some of them are cows, some of them are sheep. And you can't mix together the isarons of a cow, the minchas nesachim of a cow and the minchas nesachim of a sheep. Why not? Because the ratios are different, as we know. A cow for 3 isarons has 6 logs of oil. That's a ratio of 2 to 1. A sheep, on the other hand, for 1 isaron has 3 logs of oil. That's a ratio of 3 to 1. If you mix them all in the same bowl, then you're going to be messing with the ratios of oil. The sheep is no longer going to have a 3 to 1 ratio, it's going to have less, and the cow is no longer going to have a 2 to 1 ratio, it's going to have more. So Reb Shimon says this has nothing to do with all of these all these different types of korbanos that we bring on Sukkot. Rather, simply, Reb Shimon says, based on the shita of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and Daf Peches, that if you bring 60 isarons of flour, you bring but 1 log of oil. So to mix the maximum amount of flour that can be mixed with just 1 log of oil is 60 isarons. You can mix together up to 60 isarons of flour with just 1 log of oil. They said to him, Shishim nivlalim, what? 60, you can mix 60 with 1 log. 61 is all of a sudden it's too much. 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 20, 50, 59, 60. You can do all that with 1 log. 61, that's too much. Well, all of a sudden 61 becomes too much. Amar Loim, to which Rav Shimon says, yes. Call me those chacham ken. That's how like all measurements of the chacham work. By Bayim Sa Tovel, a mikvah that's our Bayim Sa, you can dip in and become pure. By Bayim Sa Chaser Kordov, but 40 Sa minus the tiniest amount, all of a sudden, Eno Yachalit Boba, and all of a sudden it won't work. Not even a little. That's how the shiurim work. There's a cutoff, there's an amount. Once you don't have that amount anymore, once you exceed that amount, or whatever, in the case of the minchas, if you have too much flour, in the case of the mikveh, you have too little water, whatever it is, if you don't have the required amount, even if you're off by just the tiniest amount, it's no good. So Shimon says, look, the Chacham say that a ratio of 60 isarons to 1 log of oil, you can mix together in the mixing bowl. If you have 61 isarons of flour for just 1 log of oil, you won't be able to effectively mix the mincha. Says the Gemara, Sha'il she'ela limayla Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Lai. This shaila was asked to Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda. Minayin la'omer arei olai shishim ve'echad maybe shishim b'chli echad ve'echad b'chli echad. How do we know that if somebody says, I'm going to bring 61 isarons of flour for korban mincha, 60 go into 1 vessel, and 1 goes into a separate vessel, you can't have all 61 in the same vessel. I'm going to drink a shtickle tea. My throat's a little dry. I'm glad that I have tea and honey. Pasach Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Lai Roish Hamedabim Bechel Makim. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Lai, the first to speak in all of the places. The first time, who remembers, where's the first time we saw this phrase, the Rosh Hamedabim Bechel Makom? And Daf Samech Amud Beis. No, Samech Gimel Amud Beis, right? Whatever it is, I think Brachas, I think, is 64 pages. I think this was on 63 Amud Beis. In the Keren B'Yavne. Posted B'Chvor Achsanya. And this is based on the story, Masechta Shabbos and Daf Lamed Gimel, that Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon were all standing tzazamen, and Rabbi Yehuda praised the Romans. Rabbi Yossi was quiet, and Rabbi Shimon says, "Ma pitom, the Romans are a bunch of shmendriks." And he got in big trouble for that. He had to run away. They wanted to kill him. But the opposite happened to Rabbi Yehuda. Right? Rabbi Yossi was exiled, I think, to Tzipori, but Rabbi Yehuda received the opposite treatment. He became the Rosh HaMedabrim. He was elevated. He always gets to speak first. Ve'omar, and Rabbi Yehuda, the Rosh HaMedabrim B'chol Makom, said, Shekein matzinu tzibor mevin b'yom tov harishin shachag, as we said a few minutes ago, because that's the 61 is the maximum amount of flower offerings that are offered by the community, and that is on the b'yom harishin shachag, on the first day of Sukkot shechalil b'Shabbos, that falls out on Shabbos Shishim ve'echad, and that is 61 Yisarons. Dayu liyochid sheyifchos min hatzibor echad. So an individual should do just slightly less than that and max out for at 60 Isarons in a vessel. And if there's 61, you put the remainder of one in a different vessel. Amar lei, Reb Shimon says to Reb Yehuda, Valo elu parim ve'elim ve'elu kvasin. But one second, you have cows and rams, and you have sheep. Elu blilasan oviv, elu blilasan raka. The cows and the rams have a thicker mixture, right? 2 loaves of oil to every 1 Isaron. The sheep have a thinner mixture, 3 loaves of oil for every 1 Isaron. Elu b'dilasan shachas, ve'elu b'dilasan ben arbayim. Ve'enim v'lalan zet mizel zet. I think what it means is that basically some of them are offered in the morning, but for example, the Talmud ben arbayim is offered in the afternoon, so it's not like we're putting them all, we can't mix them all together, they're being offered at different times. So, Omar Loi, Emer Ata. So Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Shimon, okay, so what do you suggest? How do you understand it? Amalai, he says to Rabbi Yehuda, Hareyu Omer, the pasuk says, V'chol mincha bilula b'shemen v'chareva, that any mincha that is mixed with oil. Kvar Omer Torah, have a mincha she yichol libal, you have to bring a mincha that can be mixed together. So 60 can be mixed together with 1 log. 61 can't be mixed together effectively with 1 log. Amar le, Rabbi Yehuda says to Rabbi Shimon, B'shishim nivlalim, b'shishim ve'echad, and nivlalim what? Up to 60 Isarons can be mixed with a log. All of a sudden, you hit 61 and we can't handle that. That's too much. Amar lo, to which Rabbi Shimon answers, Kol midos chacham ken. That's the way that all the amounts of the chacham work. That if they're off by a small amount, it's unusable. Barbayim saya, where am I? Okay, no. Barbayim saya utovel. You can go to the mikveh in 40 sa. Barbayim saya chaser kartov enu yachol lidbo. Even the tiniest amount, less than 40 sa, you can't be tovel in that mikveh and become tor. Kibeya mitame tumas ochlin, kibeya chaser sumsum, ein mitame tumas ochlin. This is mitame, not mitame. That any amount of food can become tamei tumas ochlin, but to be able to convey tumas ochlin to others, it would have to have a kibeya, the size of an egg. Any amount less, even the size of a sesame seed, it would no longer be a kibeya, and it would not convey tuma to others. Shlosha mitame b'midros. That 3 tvachim by 3 tvachim would make a cloth, a fabric, tamei midros. If a zav stands on it, for example, it would become tamei tumas midros. We learned about it in where did we learn? I think it was in Mitzorah. I think we learned about it at the end of Parshas tumas midra. I think it was a Parshas, maybe Tazria. But either Tazir or Mitzrayim, maybe both of them. We learned about Tumas Midras, that it basically has the same status. I believe it has the same, yeah. It has the same status of Tuma as the, I think it applies to Mitzorah as well, definitely a Zav. I think it applies to Mitzorah as well. And if you touch somebody, I think it's Matami Begodim. Anyways, the thing that gets, basically, Midras is when like a Zav or a Mitzorah stands on something, it takes on their status of Tuma. And it will be Mitame as an Av Atuma. I think Latami Begodim. So Shlosha al Shlosha, so it has to be 3 Tvachim by 3 Tvachim in order to contract Tumas Midras. Shlosha al Shlosha Chosor Nima, but if it's 3 Tvachim by 3 Tvachim, but minus a hair's breadth, it won't be Mitami Tumas Midras. So Reb Shimon says, effectively, yes, 60 Isarins can be mixed with 1 log, 61 can't. Now famously, and who cares if they, so what, 61 Isarins with 1 log of oil, you can't effectively mix it. So what? Be'atnam, we learn in the Mishnah, and Daf Yudches, im lo balul kosher, if you didn't mix the mincha, nicht gefährlich, it's still kosher. So why are we getting so worked up about, well, it's too much flour, you can't mix it. You don't need to mix it anyways. Obviously you should, but if you didn't, it's fine. So why are we getting so, even if you didn't mix it, who cares? Reb Zera famously, kol aroi lebila in bila ma'akeves bo, v'chol she'ein aroi lebila, bila ma'akeves bo. Anything that is able to be mixed, we say, okay, if you didn't mix it, nish gefährlich, but it has to be able to be mixed. If you have too much flour, 61 isarons, and it can't be mixed, we'll say that's a problem. We'll say, well, you have to be able to mix it. Once you can mix it, okay, even if you didn't mix it, it's fine. But you have to be able to mix it. If you can't mix it, that's a problem. Omer Bevai Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Maise befreda achash obeis Rebbe. There was a maise with a preda is what? I think a mule of Rebbe's house. Shemesa, that it died. V'shiru chacham mezdama b'revius. And the chachamim were measuring the blood to see if it was a revius. If it was a revius, it would be mitame. It would convey tumah. But if it was less than a revius, then it would not. Masiv Rab, so meaning even though it's a neveya is mitame, but the blood would only be mitame bit revius. Masiv Rab Yitzchak bar Bisna asked a question. He says, really? Would the blood of a mule be mitame? Hey, Rabbi Yeshua ben Beseira al dam nevelos shu tahor, that the blood of nevela is tahor. V'amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Beseira, Maiseh, there was a story, v'yunocharin arodios la'arayos be'istaria shomelech, that there was a Maiseh that whatever that they needed to feed the lions of the army, of the king's army. You think we should get lions? You think the IDF needs lions? Imagine going to Lebanon with lions. That would be insane. Just bring some lions into like South Lebanon. Wow. That might be considered indiscriminate. Imagine showing up with lions. Oh my gosh. And elephants. Wow. Akuponim. So they needed to feed the lions. So they were feeding them, they were killing wild donkeys and feeding them to the lions for food. And there was so much blood. The people that were Ola Regel in Yerushalayim, they were like wading through blood up into their knees. A lot of donkey blood. Because they had a lot of lions. The rabbis didn't say like, oh, you guys are tamei now. Ishtik. Bebai was quiet. Seems like even a revius of blood of this mule should be tahor. Reb Zika says to Rebevai, my time lo komadamar, why don't you respond? So Rebevai answers a kind of unrelated but very interesting answer. He says, well, I'm having difficulty responding because I don't have the strength. I don't have the courage to respond. Reb Chanan says, in the Tochacha, in Parshas Kisavo, it says, and your life will be hanging in front of you. It's somebody who doesn't have his own field to grow his own produce and he's dependent on buying from others yearly. This is somebody who can't buy food for the year. He has to buy, every week he gets enough money, and every Erev Shabbos he buys food for the week. That's somebody who is mamish living hand to mouth. Every day he buys the food that he needs for that day. And says a Bevite, I'm in that category. I am living hand to mouth, and my head is elsewhere. I can't focus on responding. So how do we respond? How do we pass it? No, Rabbi Bevite had said that a revius of blood from an avela would be mitame, but we had seen that people were wading in blood up into their knees and they were tahor. So Rabbi Yosef says, Rabbi Yehuda Moriana Devenesiya Hava. Now, I remembered having learned this before, that Rabbi Yehuda was the posek of the house of Rebbe. But I didn't remember where I saw it, and Baruch Hashem, it came up again on today's daf. We saw it in Masechta Shkalim. I found earlier, we saw this in Masechta Shkalim. We're seeing it again now that Rabbi Yehuda was the posek of the house of Rebbe. This is why I assume that Rabbi Yehuda had a relationship, that Rebbe had a relationship with Rabbi Yehuda because he was the posek of Rebbe. V'ori like Ishmaite, and Rabbi Yehuda paskined like his own opinion. Desani Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda Shisha Dvarim Mikule Beis Shammai Mechumah Beis Hillel. There are three things that are six things, six examples of scenarios where Beis Shammai is more lenient and Beis Hillel is more stringent. Dam nevelos, when it comes to the blood of nevelos, Beis Shammai mitarim, Beis Shammai say tahor, u Beis Hillel mitamin, Beis Hillel say tamei. Amar Reb Yosi Reb Yehuda af kishetimu Beis Hillel, when Beis Hillel says that the blood of nevela is tamei, lo tamu ella b'revius, it has to be at least a revius, o v'yochel likrosh, because a revius can congeal v'lamar al kazayis and be a kazayis. So therefore, to answer the question of is a revius of blood from a nevela tamei, Rabbi Yehuda would say yes, it is tamei, but it has to be a revius, because a revius can congeal and become a kazayis. Friends, that was Daf Kuf Gimel, Daf 103 of Masechta Menachos. We began our Mishnah. We began Daf Kuf Gimel with a Mishnah that discussed alternative mincha donation commitments. I.e., if you say, I'm going to bring a mincha, but of barley, without oil, frankincense, it'll be regular flour, etc. So the Chachamim say it's treated as a standard mincha, and you bring a regular mincha of wheat with frankincense and oil, etc. The question is why? So Chizkiah says, well, because they reflect the opinion of Beis Shammai. He says, when he says, I'm going to bring a mincha, stop right there. We don't care what we say after that. He says, you're going to bring a mincha, bring a mincha. Rabbi Yochanan says, you can even say that it's Beis Hillel, but that's specifically because he says, I'm going to bring a mincha of barley, for example, which maybe he's making a mistake. So we clarify. Did you know that it has to be wheat? He says, okay, I didn't know, but okay, wheat. Yeah, I would have said wheat then. So in that case, he brings wheat. Now, Reb Shimon, however, disagrees with the Tanna Kama, and he says that it does not count. He does not bring a mincha, since it is not the normal. He didn't commit in the normal way that people commit to bringing minachos. And he says he can bring a mincha of barley or without oil or frankincense, whatever. That's not a normal commitment. He doesn't have to bring anything. And then we got to a new Mishnah that discussed maximum flour amounts for the mincha. The maximum amount of flour that can be put in one bowl is 60 isarons. If you commit 61 isarons, that remainder of one isaron is going to go in a separate bowl. Rabbi Yehuda says that the reason for that is based on the maximum amount of public isarons in the temple, and that is on the first day of Sukkot. If it falls out on Shabbos, 61 isarons will be offered that day in the Beis HaMikdash. And because there will be 61 Isarons, so since that's the max for the public offering, so the max for a personal offering will just be one lower at 60 Isarons can be put in one vessel, and that's okay. After that, you have to put it in a separate vessel. Rabbi Shimon says it's based on being able to mix 60 Isarons with oil. 60 Isarons could be mixed together with oil. 61 is already too much. It can't be mixed together with oil, and therefore it needs to be put in with a log of oil. Therefore, it needs to be in a separate vessel. We, of course, saw the famous opinion of Reb Zera of Kol Haroy Lebila. We said, well, who cares if it's mixed anyways? You don't technically need to mix it, but we said yes, but it has to be able to be mixed. As long as it's able to be mixed, even if you didn't mix it, nish geferlich. But if you can't mix it, that's a problem. And then at the end we discussed a revis of blood of an avela that will be matame. That blood of an avela is matame berevis, but less than revis. It's not. Friends, that was daf Kuf Gimel daf 103 of Masechta Menachos. Hope you enjoyed. Have a great Shabbos. Cheers.